In making these transformations you're hearing about on this program, government leaders tell me each one is different, but they also say they see common elements with the journeys their colleagues and peers are leading. Chris Elsins is Director of Public Sector Go-to-Market for Domino Data Lab. He tells me the common threads he sees in those transformations.
I would say over the last 2.5 years, we've seen a significant uptick in interest in adopting innovative solutions to solve problems. And this event in particular, focusing on digital modernization, but really a lot of that is emphasized around autonomy, AI, right? How do you acquire these solutions? How do you make them production ready? How do you scale them? And so I think the pattern that we've seen emerge and the track that we followed from going from prototype to a production agreement followed kind of a few key components. And so the first is trying to find prototypes that have high impact, that can get awareness across the broader organization, that will convince folks that this is something worth investing in and continuing to scale up to solve real-world mission applications. And not just scoping a prototype and thinking, okay, you're going to define the exact right requirements up front, click through all these boxes, that equals success, and you're off to the races. Particularly with AI and autonomy, there's so many moving variables that you have to plan for iteration. And so that's something that our partners in NAVC and NAVWAR have been really good about, keeping it an open-ended scoping for the prototype. And that allowed us the flexibility to get to a really good outcome working with the operators and the sailors. I think some of the other components, commercial industry is really good, I think, at off-the-shelf getting you 80, maybe even 90% of the way there. But the Navy is going to have very unique requirements that we just don't see on the commercial side, like working with acoustic sonar data is not something that many commercial enterprises are involved in. And so being planned to partner across a broader, diverse set of companies, both software providers and contractors who can do the dev work is really important. So coming in with that mindset and working to integrate at the outset and thinking about the kind of standards and protocols that you can implement. I think outside of that, always keeping an eye towards scale. And this is where I think vendors can be really helpful and thinking about, okay, if we're successful here, where else across the Navy could this be useful? Start striking up those discussions and seeing where there are similarities, and then figuring out a path once you do get to an accessible contract and you're deployed in an accessible environment to rapidly hit the ground running.
You mentioned that there are a lot of technologies and so on that the services use that the commercial world doesn't use or doesn't use very much. But are there lessons to learn from what the commercial sector does use to apply maybe even to some of those technologies that are not commonly used in the commercial side?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. I was listening to a presentation this morning that is talking about the hybrid fleet, right? You're going to have manned vehicles alongside autonomous vehicles. And how do you think about working across both of those, which are, fundamentally different technologies and ways of operating? And so it draws a parallel. So one of the common challenges and objectives for our commercial customers right now is deploying agents, right? And how do you manage a workforce that involves agents and actual people on the same team? And one of the things that we've seen be successful there, and some of the more forward-thinking organizations within the military are also talking in this way, is really creating risk profiles around different use cases and applications, and identifying one where you can drive impact within an acceptable risk threshold. And by doing so, you can start to win hearts and minds, because I think there's a lot of opaqueness around the topic of autonomy and AI. There's a lot of fear that brings to bear. And so being able to demonstrate within an acceptable risk profile how you can take something into production, where its limitations are, how you use it, and seeing that as opposed to just trying to educate people from more of a theoretical standpoint, we've seen be highly successful in industry, and we're starting to see early successes in government as well.
Quick final thought. Given the proliferation of at least the discussion right now around autonomy and AI, how are you seeing those intersect with the digitalization, modernization efforts that the sea services are taking on?
It's a really good question. So a big problem set for the work that we're doing, particularly because we're bringing AI to bear, but you have autonomy software, you have different software developers that need to create capabilities, is how do you integrate these solutions? And so barring having a reference architecture that somebody creates, we're trying to iterate and create that with government, but doing it in enough of an open-ended way that we know we're not going to have the finished product at the outset. Kind of in a similar vein to what we were discussing before. And then thinking about what kind of open standards we might be able to coalesce on. And so I think that's where the AI autonomy piece is fitting within the broader digital transformation, modernization efforts. And there's a lot of work to be done there, but I think people are starting to think in that direction, which is really promising.
Chris Elsins of Domino Data Lab.